Power, control, and the abuse of these are dominant themes in The Tempest. Prospero is the play's central character, and Shakespeare uses the whole of the first act to demonstrate not only the nature of his powers, but also the extent of them. The first scene starts in medias res, or in the middle of the action, as the characters, as well as the audience, are plunged into the midst of a storm of almost biblical proportions. We find out in Act 1, Scene 2, that this tempest is merely a manifestation of Prospero's magical powers, and the frightening force of the sea can be understood as symbolising his fury at the way in which he has been treated by his brother Antonio and by Alonso, the King of Naples. The chaos caused by the tempest creates chaos in the power dynamics of those on board the ship. The fact that they are at the mercy of the storm means that Alonso's power, conferred on him by his kingship, becomes irrelevant and thus effectively renders him subordinate even to the boatswain. As the boatswain very succinctly puts it, "What cares these roarers for the name of king? To cabin, silence, trouble us not." Note the string of the 3 abrupt commands that he is rudely able to give Gonzalo here that signal the way in which the established power structure has been turned on its head, and this sets the tone for the whole play. Of course, we find out at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 2, with Prospero reassuring Miranda that the direful spectacle of the wreck I have with such provision in mine art, so safely ordered that there is no soul, no, not so much perdition as an hair, betid to any creature in the vessel. Note the use of the word spectacle here, which suggests a showy, if terrifying, theatrical production, which is nothing but an illusion. Shakespeare portrays the character of Prospero in this act as one who is in control of all the action, just like a theatrical director directing a play. And Shakespeare signals that he wishes Prospero to be seen in this light to the audience later on in the scene, when, plotting with Ariel, he decides that the action must be carried out within a strict time frame of 4 hours, like a theatrical performance. He establishes that the time is at least 2 glasses, or 2 hours, past the mid-season, or noon, i.e. it is about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He decrees that the time twixt 6 and now must by us both be spent most preciously. 2 o'clock in the afternoon was the time of day, during the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras, when theatrical productions started, and they generally lasted for 4 hours. In a very subtle example of Shakespeare breaking the fourth wall, Prospero seems to be signalling to the audience, thus adding yet another layer to his powers, that the play will unfold in real time, i.e. 4 hours in the world of the play will last 4 hours in the world of the audience. Prospero's power allows him not only to conjure up a storm, but also to determine its outcome, the way in which the story unfolds from that point on, and just how long it will last. He is also able to influence, whether it be through magic, the threat of magic, or simply his forceful personality, the behaviour of the other characters, such as Miranda in his role as her father, and Ariel and Caliban in his role as their master. When Prospero sets down the trappings of his magical powers, i.e. his cloak, his wand and his book, he remains a very forceful, albeit more human, personality as he recounts to Miranda how they came to be on the island in the first place. He controls the direction of the conversation, and as he warms up to his story, his speeches dominate, getting longer as Miranda's get shorter. When he suspects that his daughter's attention is wandering on a number of occasions, he abruptly scolds her, "Thou attendest not," which prompts her lightning-quick response, "Oh, good sir, I do." And when he needs to speak to Ariel in private, he is quickly able to make her fall asleep against her will. "Thou art inclined to sleep. 'Tis a good dullness, and give it way. I know thou canst not choose." Shakespeare then individually introduces the characters of Ariel and Caliban, not only as a means of providing the audience with the play's backstory, but also of further establishing, through the interactions of the master with his servants, the nature of his powers and how he chooses to exercise them in different ways. Prospero originally used his magical powers to free Ariel after Sycorax, using her own form of black magic, trapped him into a cloven pine, within which rift imprisoned thou didst painfully remain 12 years. When Ariel complains to Prospero about the amount of work he is expecting him to do, and that he was promised his freedom, Prospero not only reminds him of his debt to him, because it was mine art when I arrived and heard thee that made gape the pine and let thee out, but also, in order to remind him of just how powerful he is, threatens him with the same again. If thou more murmurest, I will rend an oak and peg thee in his knotty entrails till thou hast howled away 12 winters. Shakespeare also makes use of this interaction to differentiate Prospero's own magical powers from those of this damned witch Sycorax, who was exiled on the island for mischiefs manifold and sorceries terrible to enter human hearing. Shakespeare distances Prospero's kind of magical powers from her earthy and abhorred commands, which Ariel, a spirit of the air, was too delicate to obey. If the play is to have any prospect of a happy ending, he cannot be seen to be dabbling in the demonic dark arts. Prospero reveals another side to the way in which he chooses to exercise his power when we see him interact almost immediately afterwards in the scene with Caliban, and we notice a significant change in his language when he speaks to him. Although Ariel and Caliban are both under Prospero's control and both desire their freedom, the way in which they come to terms with their enslavement influences how Prospero chooses to exert his control. While Ariel is as much a collaborator as a servant, willingly undertaking, at least after his initial sulkiness, the skilled tasks of which Prospero is incapable, in the knowledge that his freedom is imminent, Caliban is purely used for the performing of menial tasks for which Prospero is too proud. He does make our fire, fetch in our wood, and serves in offices that profit us. And he knows that he has no hope of ever being freed. Note how, when Prospero summons Ariel, his language is gentle and affectionate. Come away, servant, come. I'm ready now. Approach, my Ariel, come. But when he calls for Caliban, his contempt is clear as he showers him with curses and demands his presence. Thou poisonous slave, got by the devil himself upon thy wicked dam, come forth. Caliban responds in kind with a string of obscenities. As wicked dew as e'er my mother brushed with raven's feather from unwholesome fen drop on you both. A southwest blow on ye and blister you all o'er. Outraged by Caliban's insolence, Prospero shows that he is susceptible to using his magical powers for spiteful ends, as he threatens to torment him physically. For this be sure tonight thou shalt have cramps, side stitches that shall pen thy breath up. Urchins shall for that vast of night they may work, all exercise on thee. Thou shalt be pinched as thick as honeycomb, each pinch more stinging than bees that made 'em. The elaborate nature of his proposed punishments show that Prospero is not above using his powers for petty revenge. Shakespeare also explores the way in which power, or the illusion of power, affects people in different ways. Whenever weakness or a power vacuum is perceived to exist, human nature demands that it be exploited or filled, and this can bring out the worst type of greediness. The reason that Prospero and Miranda are on the island in the first place is because he entrusted the brother he loved almost as much as his own daughter with the manage of my state. He admits that he took his eye off the ball, as the government I cast upon my brother, and to my state grew stranger, being transported and wrapped in secret studies. Antonio was so corrupted by the powers that Prospero delegated to him that he began to think that he was the Duke in everything but name, until he desired to have no screen between this part he played and him he played it for. He needs will be absolute Milan. And so to achieve this gets his brother and niece out of the way by abandoning them at sea in a leaky boat. So not only has Antonio already successfully done this in the past, when he was able to exploit the power vacuum left by Prospero's neglect of his duties and his blind trust in him, to usurp him and proclaim himself as Duke of Milan, but he also, in the same way that a shark is able to detect a drop of blood in the ocean, senses Alonso's weakness in that his heir, Ferdinand, is presumed drowned, and Claribel, the next in line to the throne, dwells 10 leagues beyond man's life, i.e. further than a man can travel in a lifetime, which is a gross exaggeration as Tunis is only 300 miles from Naples. But he nevertheless persuades Sebastian that she is too far away to be of any threat, thus inciting him to commit regicide in order to take the crown of Naples for himself. The island itself is seen as virgin territory and is, therefore, a power vacuum begging to be filled. A number of the characters have a plan for how they would control it, which allows Shakespeare to explore notions of government and the exercise of absolute power. It also allows him to explore more specifically the impact of colonialism, but this is a subject in its own right which I'll explore in another video. Power changes people and often brings out the worst side of their natures. Caliban, before meeting up with Stefano and Trinculo, sees his route to power in peopling the isle with Calibans, i.e. in becoming a patriarchal figure whose people are bound to him by blood, even if that means raping Miranda to achieve it. On meeting Stefano and Trinculo, however, even though Caliban hates Prospero passionately for his enslavement, he slips very easily into another similar power dynamic. Thwarted by Prospero in his attempt to rape Miranda, the only way he can see of escaping Prospero's tyranny now is to offer himself up to Stefano as his slave. I'll show thee the best springs, I'll pluck thee berries, I'll fish for thee and get thee wood enough. A plague upon the tyrant that I serve. I'll bear him no more sticks, but follow thee, thou wondrous man. Stefano, with Caliban's encouragement, therefore plans to murder his way to control. Monster, I will kill this man. His daughter and I will be king and queen, save our graces, and Trinculo and thyself shall be viceroys. Gonzalo's plan for the island, in his imagining of a utopia where everyone is equal, where there would be use of service none, and no sovereignty, reveals that even those who have benevolent intentions still dream of power. Paradoxically, of course, as Sebastian snidely reminds him, the island would have no sovereign, and yet he would be king on it. The very creation of a society in your own image means that you have a de facto supreme power, and so a completely equal society is a logical impossibility, because you are using your power to a degree that no one shall have power. As Sebastian rightly sums up, the latter end of his commonwealth forgets the beginning. Shakespeare thus uses the Tempest to explore the idea that power relationships are an inherent part of human society, and therefore cannot be escaped as seen in Gonzalo's flawed vision. As such, they feature in one form or another, but especially in terms of masters and servants, in every scene of the play. Shakespeare uses the scenes of low comedy featuring Caliban, Stefano and Trinculo to further explore ideas of power, control and rebellion. In these scenes, the servant becomes the master, and Caliban, in order to gain his freedom, willingly but paradoxically exchanges one form of enslavement for another. Even in the love scene between Ferdinand and Miranda in Act 3, Scene 1, Ferdinand, influenced by the tropes to be found in the literary concept of courtly love, casts her as his mistress and himself as her servant, even though, with him as a male heir to a kingdom and her as the female heir to a dukedom, the power dynamic should be reversed. In a soliloquy at the beginning of the scene, carrying the logs as he has been ordered to by Prospero, he exclaims, "This my mean task would be as heavy to me, as odious, but the mistress which I serve quickens what's dead, and makes my labours pleasures." Later on in the scene, shortly after Miranda has entered, he professes his love for her by using the same imagery. "The very instant that I saw you did my heart fly to your service. There resides to make me slave to it." Prospero orchestrates most of the action in the play, as though he is playing a game of chess, i.e. he moves the various characters about the island like the pieces on a chessboard, strategically separating them into groups, disorientating them so that they feel vulnerable and powerless, and controlling whom they meet and when. The objective of chess is to effectively capture the opponent's king, although the piece itself is never actually taken. It is enough that it is trapped so that it cannot move without being captured. This state is called checkmate and signals the end of the game. This is effectively what Prospero does, in that he puts Alonso in such a position that he has no room for manoeuvre. It's significant that the moment at which Alonso sees Ferdinand and Miranda together for the first time is when Prospero reveals them at a game of chess. This is his way of announcing checkmate, i.e. by creating a bond between his daughter and Alonso's son without the latter's knowledge, and presenting it as a fait accompli. He has effectively captured the king. Luckily, Alonso is in such a vulnerable state that, relieved that Ferdinand is in fact alive, he receives the news of his and Miranda's betrothal and, therefore, the implicit reconciliation of himself with Prospero, joyfully. Prospero has used his power in such a subtle and strategic manner that Alonso, Ferdinand and Gonzalo are completely unaware of having been controlled by it. Ferdinand believes that it is immortal providence that has brought him to Miranda, while Gonzalo believes that it is you gods, for it is you that have chalked forth the way which brought us hither. Power and weakness are shown to be two sides of the same coin, which can easily be flipped. Prospero's books are a symbol of his power. When plotting with Stefano and Trinculo to murder him, Caliban tells them, "Remember first to possess his books, for without them he's but a sot." His books, however, are also a symbol of his weakness, as it was his devotion to studying them after all that made him shut himself away and relinquish his worldly powers, and led to his being sufficiently vulnerable to being usurped by his ambitious brother. Prospero's magic also has its limits. Even though he is able to influence people's actions, if we consider the unrepentant Antonio and Sebastian and the resentful Caliban, we can see that he has no power over their hearts. And he later dismisses his powers as rough magic that I here abjure, or mere conjuring tricks that he, from this point on, renounces. It mustn't be forgotten that witchcraft and the supernatural were the hot topics of the time, and the passing of the 1604 Witchcraft Act, along with a previous act passed in 1542, made it a crime punishable by death. James I was also a self-professed expert on witchcraft and had written a book called Demonology in 1597. It is therefore important for Shakespeare that we, and his king, understand that Prospero's magical powers are not satanic in nature, and that he willingly gives them up when his goals have been achieved. Prospero shows that he has the potential to misuse his power. He has already demonstrated that he is prey to feelings of petty revenge in his treatment of Caliban, but he also, at the end of Act 4, reveals that he is not immune from the desire to inflict great pain on those others who have done him wrong, as he ponders, "At this hour lies at my mercy all mine enemies." He does not, however, succumb to this temptation. "Though with their high wrongs I am struck to the quick, yet with my nobler reason 'gainst my fury do I take part. the rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance. And so he rises morally above characters such as Antonio, Sebastian, Caliban and Stefano, and thus paves the way for a happy ending. Shakespeare seems to be signalling to his own king, James I, that an ideal ruler such as he is one who should be feared for his powers, but is also one who wields these judiciously and virtuously. Prospero is powerless at the end of the play, as he willingly relinquishes his books and acknowledges his inherent weakness. Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have's mine own, which is most faint. He must therefore plead for his own release, which can only be achieved through the applause and cheers of the audience. But release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Many scholars believe that Shakespeare is using Prospero here as a mouthpiece to speak directly to the audience in order to announce his relinquishing of his own powers as a playwright and theatrical producer as he retires from the stage. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.